The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Clarence House as Edward Mitchell completed his routine security rounds. He had been a palace guard for 17 years, and in all that time, he had never once broken protocol. His reputation was spotless, his service exemplary. But on this particular Tuesday in late September, everything was about to change. Edward noticed something unusual during his patrol of the Eastern Wing storage areas. A large antique trunk sat partially concealed behind several moving boxes in one of the lesser-used corridors. The trunk itself was magnificent, made of rich mahogany with brass fixtures that gleamed even in the dim hallway light. What caught his attention was not the trunk's beauty, but rather the fact that it had been left unlocked, its heavy lid slightly ajar. Protocol dictated that Edward should report any unusual items or security concerns immediately. However, something about this particular trunk made him pause. There were fresh scuff marks on the floor around it, suggesting it had been moved recently. The brass nameplate on the front bore an inscription that made his heart skip a beat. It belonged to Tom Parker Bowles, the son of Queen Camilla. Edward glanced down the empty corridor. His radio crackled softly on his belt, but no urgent calls came through. The trunk's lid seemed to beckon him, and against every instinct of his professional training, he found himself kneeling beside it. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the heavy lid fully open. Inside, the trunk was filled with an assortment of items that seemed oddly personal for storage in a palace corridor. There were old photographs, some yellowed with age, showing family gatherings and private moments. Leather-bound journals with dates spanning several decades sat stacked neatly to one side. But what immediately caught Edward's attention was a collection of letters tied together with a faded red ribbon. The topmost letter bore a royal seal, one that Edward recognized immediately. His breath caught in his throat as he realized these were not ordinary correspondence. These letters appeared to be private communications between members of the royal family, dating back many years. Some envelopes were addressed in handwriting he had seen countless times on official documents throughout the palace. Edward knew he should close the trunk and walk away. He should pretend he had never seen any of this. But curiosity overwhelmed his better judgment. He carefully lifted the bundle of letters, noticing how the paper felt delicate and important in his hands. Before he could examine them further, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Panic surged through Edward's chest. He quickly replaced the letters and was about to close the trunk when a shadow fell across the hallway. He looked up to find himself face to face with Prince William, who had apparently been walking through the service corridors, something he occasionally did to avoid the more formal routes through the palace. The prince stopped abruptly, his eyes moving from Edward's startled face to the open trunk and back again. For a moment, neither man spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication and unspoken questions. Edward's mind raced, searching for an explanation that would not cost him his career and possibly much more. William's expression was unreadable as he stepped closer. Edward rose to his feet quickly, standing at attention, but it was too late to pretend he had not been examining the trunk's contents. The prince looked down at the open trunk, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Your Royal Highness," Edward began, his voice barely steady, "I was conducting my security rounds when I discovered this trunk left open in the corridor. I was concerned about—" William raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "How long have you been standing here, Mitchell?" The prince's tone was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "Only a few moments, sir. I had just opened the lid fully when you arrived." Edward decided honesty was his only option at this point. The prince studied him for a long moment, then glanced back down the corridor from where he had come. "Close it," William said quietly. Edward immediately obeyed, lowering the trunk's heavy lid until it clicked shut. He stepped back, unsure what would happen next. His career flashed before his eyes, 17 years of dedicated service potentially ending in disgrace. But William did not call for additional security. He did not reach for his phone to report the incident. Instead, he moved closer to the trunk, running his hand along its polished surface as if lost in thought. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried a weight that had not been there before. "This trunk should not be here," William said, more to himself than to Edward. "It was supposed to be moved to secure storage weeks ago." Edward remained silent, sensing that any response might make the situation worse. He watched as the prince crouched down beside the trunk, examining the nameplate with an expression that seemed to combine resignation and something else, perhaps concern or even worry. "Did you read any of the letters?" William asked suddenly, his eyes sharp as they fixed on Edward. The guard's throat felt dry. "No, sir. I only saw that there were letters inside. I did not have time to examine them before you arrived." William nodded slowly, seeming to weigh the truthfulness of this statement. He stood up, straightening his jacket with a decisive movement. "Mitchell, I need you to understand something. What you have stumbled upon this morning involves matters of considerable sensitivity, family matters." "I understand completely, Your Royal Highness," Edward replied, though his curiosity was now burning even more intensely. What could possibly be in that trunk that would cause such obvious tension? The prince seemed to come to a decision. He pulled out his mobile phone and made a brief call, speaking in tones too low for Edward to hear clearly. When he finished, he turned back to the guard with an expression that was almost apologetic. "Someone will be here shortly to move this trunk to proper storage. Until they arrive, I need you to stand guard here. No one else is to approach or examine this trunk. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir, absolutely." William started to walk away but paused, turning back one final time. "Mitchell, your discretion in this matter is not just appreciated, it is essential. There are things in that trunk that could cause considerable complications if they became public knowledge. I trust I can count on your continued loyalty to the family." Edward stood even straighter. "You have my word, Your Royal Highness. I have served the crown faithfully for 17 years. That will not change." The prince nodded, a hint of relief crossing his features. But as he walked away down the corridor, Edward could not shake the feeling that this morning's discovery was only the beginning of something much larger. Whatever secrets that trunk contained, they were clearly important enough to command the immediate attention of the future King of England himself. 20 minutes after Prince William departed, 2 men in plain clothes arrived at the corridor where Edward stood guard. They identified themselves with security credentials that marked them as part of the Royal Protection Command's most discreet unit. Neither man spoke beyond what was necessary, as they efficiently loaded the trunk onto a wheeled cart and secured it with straps. Edward watched them disappear around the corner, the wheels of the cart echoing softly against the stone floors. He completed his shift in a daze, his mind replaying the morning's events repeatedly. By the time he returned home to his small flat in South Kensington, the weight of what he had witnessed pressed heavily on his shoulders. That evening, as Edward sat alone with a cup of tea growing cold in his hands, his phone rang. The number was unlisted, and for a moment he considered not answering. When he finally picked up, a crisp female voice informed him that his presence was requested at Kensington Palace the following morning at 9 o'clock sharp. The call ended before he could ask any questions. Sleep proved impossible that night. Edward lay awake wondering if he was about to be dismissed or worse, accused of some breach of protocol. He had told the truth to Prince William, but would that be enough? The morning could not come fast enough, yet he dreaded it with equal measure. At precisely 9 o'clock, Edward presented himself at the designated entrance of Kensington Palace. A private secretary he had never met before escorted him through corridors he had walked 1,000 times, yet today they felt unfamiliar and intimidating. They stopped outside a private study and the secretary knocked softly before opening the door. Prince William stood by the window, looking out over the palace gardens. He turned as Edward entered and the secretary quietly withdrew, closing the door behind him. The study was warm and comfortable, filled with family photographs and personal touches that made it clear this was not a formal receiving room. "Please, sit down, Mitchell," William said, gesturing to a chair near the fireplace. His tone was much more relaxed than it had been in the corridor the previous day. Edward sat carefully on the edge of the chair, his back straight, hands folded in his lap. William took the chair opposite him, leaning back with a thoughtfulness that suggested he had spent considerable time deciding exactly what to say. "I imagine you did not sleep well last night," the prince began with a slight smile. That was almost sympathetic. "I confess I did not." "Your Royal Highness," Edward admitted. William nodded. "I thought as much. Let me ease your mind immediately. You are not in any trouble. In fact, quite the opposite. Your handling of yesterday's situation demonstrated exactly the kind of discretion and loyalty that the family values most highly." Relief flooded through Edward, though he remained cautious. Thank you, sir. I only did what I felt was proper under the circumstances. Yes, but many others might have done differently, William said, his expression growing more serious. They might have examined those letters more thoroughly. They might have taken photographs with their phone. They might have sold information to the press before the day was over. But you did none of those things. Edward felt uncomfortable with the praise. I would never betray the trust placed in me, sir. I believe you, William said. Which is why I am going to explain something to you that very few people outside the immediate family know about. What was in that trunk, Mitchell, was not simply old letters and photographs. It was a collection of documents and correspondence that my stepbrother Tom had been cataloging for a private family archive. The prince stood and moved to the window again, his hands clasped behind his back. Tom has always been interested in family history. A few years ago, he began gathering materials from various family members, letters, diaries, photographs, with the intention of preserving them properly. It was meant to be a thoughtful project, a way to ensure these pieces of our family's story were not lost to time. Edward listened carefully, beginning to understand why such materials might be sensitive. However, William continued, some of what Tom collected included correspondence and documents that were never meant to be gathered together in one place. Private letters between family members, honest communications about difficult times and difficult decisions. Nothing scandalous, you understand, but certainly things that would be misinterpreted or sensationalized if they fell into the wrong hands. He turned back to face Edward. Tom realized this himself several months ago. He brought the trunk to my mother, to Camilla, explaining his concerns. She agreed that the materials should be properly secured. Plans were made to transfer everything to the Royal Archives under strict confidentiality protocols. But the logistics took longer than expected, and in the meantime, the trunk was moved several times during renovation work at Clarence House. The picture was becoming clearer to Edward now, and it ended up in that corridor by mistake, he said quietly. Exactly. Someone on the moving crew placed it there temporarily and then forgot about it. It should have been secured immediately, but sometimes even in a palace, simple human error occurs. William returned to his chair. When I encountered you yesterday morning, I realized immediately what had happened. My first instinct was anger, not at you, but at the situation. Then I had to make a quick decision about how to handle it. Edward waited, sensing there was more to come. I could have simply ordered the trunk removed and said nothing to you about its contents, but that would have left you wondering, perhaps worrying about what you had stumbled upon. Worse, it might have made the whole situation seem more mysterious and significant than it actually is. Secrets have a way of growing larger in the imagination than in reality. William leaned forward, his expression earnest. I wanted you to understand that this is not some grand conspiracy or hidden scandal. It is simply a family trying to manage its own history with care and discretion. We have a right to that, I think, even if we live much of our lives in the public eye. Of course, Your Royal Highness, Edward agreed. Every family deserves privacy in certain matters. I am glad you understand, William said. Now I need to ask something of you. I need your word that you will not speak of this to anyone. Not to other guards, not to friends, not even to family members. What happened yesterday must remain completely confidential. Edward did not hesitate. You have my word, sir. I will speak of this to no one. The prince studied him for a long moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied. Good. There is one more thing. He stood and walked to his desk, picking up an envelope. This is a letter of commendation for your personnel file, noting your exemplary conduct and discretion in a sensitive situation. It will reflect well on you when promotions are being considered. He handed the envelope to Edward, who took it with genuine surprise. That is very generous, sir. I did not expect you did more than you realize, William interrupted gently. In this family, trust is the most valuable currency we have. You have earned ours. As Edward left Kensington Palace an hour later, the morning sun now high in the sky, he felt as though a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He also carried with him a deeper understanding of the people he served. They were not just royals living in palaces, but human beings trying to navigate the complicated intersection of public duty and private life. What he did not know was that his encounter with that trunk would have far-reaching consequences that neither he nor Prince William could have anticipated. 3 weeks passed quietly after Edward's meeting with Prince William. He returned to his normal duties and life at the palace resumed its familiar rhythm. The trunk incident faded into the background of his daily routine, becoming just another memory among thousands collected during his years of service. He kept his word, mentioning the matter to no one. Then on a gray October morning, everything changed again. Edward was assigned to security detail for a private family gathering at Kensington Palace. These events were always delicate operations, requiring guards to be present yet invisible, protective yet unobtrusive.
As guests began arriving, Edward took his position in one of the main hallways,
monitoring access to the private reception rooms. Tom Parker Bowles arrived earlier than most other guests, accompanied by his sister Laura. Edward had seen both of them numerous times over the years, but had never exchanged more than polite greetings. Today, however, Tom stopped directly in front of him. "You are Mitchell, correct?" Tom asked, his tone friendly but his eyes sharp with intelligence. "Yes, sir," Edward replied, maintaining his professional demeanor. "I understand I owe you a debt of gratitude," Tom said quietly, glancing around to ensure they would not be overheard. "William told me what happened with my trunk. Thank you for handling it with such discretion." Edward felt uncomfortable with the attention. "I only did my duty, sir." Tom smiled, but there was something sad in his expression. "My duty nearly caused a family crisis. I should have been more careful with those materials. Sometimes good intentions lead to complicated situations." Before Edward could respond, Laura touched her brother's arm gently. "We should go in," she said softly. "They are waiting for us." As the siblings moved past him toward the reception room, Edward noticed that Tom looked troubled, as if carrying a burden heavier than simple embarrassment over a misplaced trunk. The observation stayed with Edward throughout the afternoon. The gathering lasted several hours, and Edward remained at his post, watching family members come and go. He could not hear conversations from inside the reception room, but the atmosphere felt tense. Several times voices were raised, though never loud enough to make out specific words. At one point, Queen Camilla emerged looking distressed, accompanied by a lady-in-waiting who helped her to a private sitting room. When the event finally concluded, Prince William was among the last to leave. He spotted Edward in the hallway and approached with purposeful stride. His expression was grave. "Mitchell, walk with me," William said, not waiting for a response before setting off down the corridor. Edward fell into step beside him, sensing that something significant had occurred. They walked in silence until reaching a small private office that William sometimes used for informal meetings. The prince closed the door and turned to face him. "I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty," William began without preamble. "When you opened that trunk, are you absolutely certain you did not read any of the letters inside?" The question surprised Edward. "I am certain, Your Royal Highness. I only saw that there were letters tied with ribbon. I did not have time to examine them before you arrived." William's jaw tightened. "And you have told no one about finding the trunk? Not even mentioned it in passing to another guard or a family member?" "No one, sir. I gave you my word and I have kept it." The prince seemed to be wrestling with a decision. He moved to the window, staring out at nothing in particular. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of worry that Edward had never heard before. "Someone has leaked information from those documents," William said flatly. "A journalist contacted the palace press office this morning with questions about specific letters that were in Tom's trunk. Letters that should have been seen by no one outside the immediate family." Edward felt his stomach drop. "Your Royal Highness, I swear to you," William raised a hand. "I believe you, Mitchell. If I did not, we would be having a very different conversation right now. But someone else must have accessed that trunk either before or after you found it. Or there is another explanation we have not yet considered." The implications were troubling. If someone had leaked sensitive family correspondence, it could cause exactly the kind of public relations nightmare that William had been trying to avoid. Edward's mind raced, trying to remember every detail of that morning. "Sir," he said slowly, "when I found the trunk, the lid was already slightly open. I assumed it had simply been left unlocked by accident. But what if someone had already been examining it before I arrived?" William turned sharply. "What time exactly did you discover it?" "It would have been approximately 7:45 in the morning, sir. The corridor was empty when I began my rounds of that section, and the moving crew would have placed it there the previous afternoon," William said, thinking aloud. "That means it sat unattended and unlocked for nearly 16 hours. Anyone with access to that corridor could have examined it." Edward hesitated, then decided to share another observation. "Your Royal Highness, there is something else." The trunk had fresh scuff marks around it, suggesting it had been moved recently. At the time, I thought perhaps the moving crew had been careless. But what if someone moved it deliberately to examine the contents in a less visible location? William's expression darkened. That would suggest this was not opportunistic but planned. Someone knew what was in that trunk and where to find it. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message, then looked back at Edward. "I am ordering a full security review. Every person who had access to that corridor will be questioned. I will not have someone in my household betraying family confidences." The prince's anger was controlled but unmistakable. Edward understood that this went beyond mere privacy concerns. For a family that lived constantly under public scrutiny, the ability to trust those closest to them was essential. A breach like this struck at the very foundation of that trust. "Mitchell," William said, his tone softening slightly, "I know this puts you in an uncomfortable position. You will likely be questioned as part of the security review. I need you to tell them everything you told me, exactly as it happened. The truth is your best protection." "I understand, sir." "Good." William moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. If anyone approaches you, journalists, photographers, anyone outside the palace, asking questions about that morning or about anything you may have seen, you are to report it immediately to the head of security. Do not engage with them under any circumstances." "Of course, Your Royal Highness." As Edward made his way back to his assigned position, his mind churned with possibilities. Who would have known about the trunk's contents? Who would have had both access and motivation to leak such information? And most troubling of all, if someone had deliberately accessed those documents, what else might they have taken or photographed that had not yet come to light? The answers to these questions would prove more complicated and disturbing than anyone could have imagined. That evening, as Edward completed his shift and prepared to leave the palace, he could not shake the feeling that he had somehow become entangled in something far larger than a simple security breach. The trunk had contained more than old letters and photographs. It had contained secrets that someone was willing to risk everything to expose. What those secrets were, and why they mattered so much, would soon become devastatingly clear. The palace, with all its grandeur and history, held many shadows. And in those shadows, betrayal wore many faces. The security review began the following morning with quiet efficiency. One by one, every staff member who had access to the corridor where the trunk had been stored was called for interviews. Edward was among the first, spending nearly 2 hours with senior security personnel going over every minute detail of that September morning. He told them everything exactly as it had happened, holding nothing back. The investigators were thorough but professional, and Edward sensed they believed his account. Still, the experience left him shaken. In 17 years of service, he had never been the subject of such scrutiny. By the third day of the investigation, the palace staff was buzzing with nervous energy. Everyone knew something serious had occurred, though official communications remained vague. Rumors spread through the corridors like wildfire, each more dramatic than the last. Some claimed state secrets had been stolen. Others whispered about scandals and blackmail. The truth, as Edward knew, was both simpler and more complicated than any of the rumors. On Thursday afternoon, Edward was summoned once again to Kensington Palace. This time he found himself in a larger conference room where Prince William sat at the head of a table alongside 2 senior security officials and a stern-looking woman he recognized as the royal family's chief legal counsel. William gestured for Edward to sit. "Thank you for coming, Mitchell. I know this has been a difficult week for you. The good news is that the investigation has cleared you of any involvement in the leak. Your account has been corroborated by security footage and by the timeline of events." Relief washed over Edward, though he kept his expression neutral. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness." However, William continued, his expression hardening. "We have identified the source of the leak, and the situation is more troubling than we initially thought." One of the security officials opened a folder and slid several photographs across the table. They showed a man in maintenance coveralls examining the trunk in the corridor. The images were grainy, captured by a security camera Edward had not realized was positioned to see that particular section. "This footage was taken at approximately 11 o'clock, the night before you discovered the trunk," the security official explained. "The man you see here is Martin Crosby, who worked as part of the maintenance crew. He had legitimate access to that corridor for routine cleaning duties. Edward studied the photographs. In one image, Crosby had the trunk fully open and was clearly photographing documents with his mobile phone. The evidence was damning and unmistakable. Crosby was interviewed yesterday, William said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Initially, he denied everything. But when confronted with this footage, he confessed. He was being paid by a tabloid newspaper to gather information about the family. When he discovered the trunk during his evening rounds, he recognized an opportunity. The legal counsel spoke up for the first time, her voice crisp and businesslike. Mr. Crosby has been arrested and will face charges for theft and breach of trust. The newspaper has been served with legal notices. We are working to prevent publication of any material obtained from those documents. Edward listened with a mixture of relief and disgust. He had worked alongside maintenance crews countless times, never imagining that one of them could be a plant, deliberately positioned to gather information for the press. There is more, William said, drawing Edward's attention back to him. During questioning, Crosby revealed that he had been working with the tabloid for nearly 6 months. The trunk was not his first target, merely the most valuable information he had managed to access. He has provided details about other items he photographed or reported on during his time here. The betrayal ran deeper than a single incident. Edward felt anger rising in his chest on behalf of the family he had served so loyally. Your Royal Highness, I am deeply sorry that someone like that was able to operate under our noses for so long. William shook his head. You have nothing to apologize for, Mitchell. If anything, this situation has revealed weaknesses in our security protocols that we are now working to address. It has also reminded me of something important, the value of genuine loyalty versus the appearance of it. He stood and moved to the window, a habit Edward had noticed he had when thinking through difficult matters. Crosby passed all the standard background checks. He had references. He seemed trustworthy, but trust is not something that can be verified through paperwork and interviews. It is proven through actions, through choices made when no one is watching. William turned back to face Edward. When you discovered that trunk, you were alone in that corridor. You could have done what Crosby did. You could have photographed those letters, sold them to the press, and made a substantial amount of money. No one would have known until it was too late. But you did not. You saw something that concerned you and you waited for guidance on how to handle it properly. That is real loyalty, Mitchell, and it is increasingly rare. Edward felt humbled by the praise but also uncomfortable with it. I only did what was right, sir. Yes, William agreed. But what is right is not always what people choose to do when faced with temptation. You made a choice that day, perhaps without even realizing how significant it was. The security official cleared his throat gently. Your Royal Highness, we should discuss the next steps. William nodded and returned to his seat. Mitchell, I have asked you here today not just to inform you about the investigation's outcome, but to ask for your help with something. The discovery of Crosby's betrayal has made it clear that we need to reassess how we handle security for sensitive materials. We also need to ensure better vetting of all staff members who have access to private areas of the palaces. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I would like you to work with our security team on developing new protocols. Your perspective as someone who actually works these corridors every day would be invaluable. You understand the practical realities of palace security in ways that administrators sitting in offices cannot. Edward was stunned by the request. Your Royal Highness, I am honored, but I am just a guard. Surely there are more qualified people. You are not just a guard, William interrupted firmly. You are someone who has proven their integrity in the most direct way possible. That makes you exactly the kind of person whose input we need. This is not about hierarchy or credentials. This is about finding people we can trust to help us protect what matters most to this family. The legal counsel added, it would be a temporary assignment, lasting approximately 3 months. You would work closely with senior security personnel while maintaining some of your regular duties. There would be additional compensation, of course, and the experience would be excellent for your career advancement. Edward looked around the table at the faces watching him expectantly. 3 months ago, he had been conducting routine patrols, his biggest concern whether it might rain during his outdoor rounds. Now he was being asked to help reshape security protocols for the British royal family. I would be honored to help in any way I can, Edward said finally. William smiled, the first genuine smile Edward had seen from him since the leak was discovered. Excellent. You will begin next Monday. Someone will contact you with the details. He stood, signaling the meeting was coming to an end. There is one more thing, Mitchell. I want you to know that what you did, both in how you handled finding the trunk and in how you have conducted yourself throughout this investigation, has not gone unnoticed at the highest levels. You have the family's gratitude, and that is not something we give lightly. As Edward left Kensington Palace that afternoon, his mind spun with the implications of what had just happened. His career had taken an unexpected turn, one that would give him insights into the workings of the royal household that few people ever saw. But more than that, he felt a renewed sense of purpose in his work. The trunk incident had revealed a betrayer in their midst, but it had also revealed something else, that integrity still mattered, that loyalty was still valued, and that sometimes the right choice made in a quiet corridor could change the entire direction of a person's life. What Edward did not yet know was that his involvement in this matter was far from over. The trunk's secrets were not fully contained, and the consequences of that September morning would continue to unfold in ways that would test his loyalty and integrity even further. Prince William's trust in him would soon be put to the ultimate test, in circumstances that neither of them could have predicted. Edward's new assignment began on a crisp Monday morning in late October. He reported to a secure office within Kensington Palace that he had never known existed, tucked away on the third floor behind what appeared to be a storage room. The space was modest but equipped with modern security monitors and communication systems that connected to every royal residence in Britain. Commander James Hartley, the head of the security review team, greeted him with a firm handshake. Hartley was a former military officer in his early 50s, with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Over the next several hours, he walked Edward through the current security protocols, pointing out vulnerabilities that the Crosby incident had exposed. The problem, Hartley explained as they reviewed floor plans of various palaces, is that we have always focused on external threats, paparazzi, intruders, potential attackers. We never adequately considered the threat from within, from people who pass background checks and seem trustworthy, but have hidden agendas. Edward studied the documents spread before them. Every system has weaknesses when human judgment is involved. People can be bought, intimidated, or deceived. The question is how we minimize those vulnerabilities. Hartley nodded approvingly. Exactly, and that is where your experience becomes valuable. You know what it is actually like to work these corridors to make split-second decisions about what is normal and what is not. We need to build that kind of instinct into our protocols. Over the following weeks, Edward immersed himself in the work. He reviewed incident reports going back 5 years, looking for patterns that might indicate other security breaches. He interviewed guards, maintenance staff, and household employees about their daily routines and the gaps they saw in current procedures. Slowly, a picture emerged of a security system that was sophisticated in some ways, but surprisingly casual in others. It was during his 3rd week in the new role that Edward made a discovery that would change everything again. He was reviewing archived security footage, looking at patterns of movement through the corridor where the trunk had been stored, when he noticed something odd. On the morning he had discovered the trunk, there had been another person in that corridor approximately 20 minutes before Edward's arrival. Edward enhanced the footage, his heart rate accelerating as the figure became clearer. It was not a maintenance worker or a guard. It was a woman in business attire, someone who appeared to have legitimate reasons to be there but whose presence at that early hour seemed unusual. She did not approach the trunk, but she did pause and look at it before continuing down the corridor. Edward froze the frame and pulled up the visitor logs for that day. According to the records, the only non-staff person scheduled to be in that section of the building that morning was a Ms. Rebecca Thornton, a historical consultant who had been hired to catalog artwork and antiques as part of a renovation project. He took his findings to Commander Hartley immediately. The older man studied the footage with a deepening frown. Thornton has been working here for 4 months, Hartley said, pulling up her file. Impeccable credentials. Doctorate in art history from Cambridge. She came recommended by the curator at the National Gallery. But you are right. She had no reason to be in that corridor at that hour. Could she have been working with Crosby? Edward suggested. It is possible, but Crosby never mentioned an accomplice during his interrogation. Hartley made several phone calls, his expression growing grimmer with each conversation. Finally, he turned back to Edward. "We need to bring this to Prince William immediately. If Thornton is involved, we may have underestimated the scope of this operation." Within an hour, Edward found himself once again in a private meeting with the prince. This time, Queen Camilla was also present, seated in a high-backed chair near the fireplace. Her expression was composed, but Edward could see the strain around her eyes. William reviewed the footage Edward had found, his jaw tightening with each passing second. When the video ended, he looked up at Hartley. "Have we located Thornton?" "She called in sick this morning, sir. We have sent officers to her registered address, but there is no answer. Her mobile phone is switched off." Camilla spoke for the first time, her voice steady despite the obvious tension. "So we have another leak then. Or perhaps the same leak with more participants than we thought." "It appears so, Your Majesty," Hartley confirmed. William stood and paced to the window, a gesture Edward now recognized as his way of processing difficult information. "What I do not understand is why. What could possibly be in those old letters that would be worth this much effort and risk?" Tom was cataloging family history, not state secrets. Camilla's expression flickered with something Edward could not quite read. Concern, perhaps, or maybe resignation. "William," she said quietly, "there is something you should know. Something Tom and I discussed when he first began this project, but which I asked him to keep confidential even from you." The prince turned sharply. "What do you mean?" The queen took a deep breath before continuing. "Some of the letters in that trunk were correspondence between your grandmother and me, from the early days after your parents separated. They were private thoughts, honest assessments of a very difficult situation. They were never meant to be seen by anyone else, certainly not by the public or even by other family members." William's expression softened slightly. "I understand that such letters would be sensitive, but surely—" "There is more," Camilla interrupted gently. "Tom also collected some correspondence between his father and various family members during the same period. Letters that discuss decisions that were made, conversations that were had. Again, nothing scandalous, but certainly things that could be misinterpreted or sensationalized by those who want to create conflict where none exists." Edward watched as understanding dawned on William's face. The letters were not damaging in themselves, but in the wrong hands, taken out of context, they could be used to stir up old controversies and create new divisions. For a family that worked hard to present a united front, such revelations could be deeply harmful. "That is why someone is so interested in them," William said slowly. "Not because they contain secrets, but because they contain perspectives that could be twisted into narratives that serve certain agendas." "Exactly," Camilla confirmed. "There are people who would very much like to see this family divided again, who profit from our discord. Those letters, selectively quoted and presented without context, could provide ammunition for years of negative coverage." William turned to Commander Hartley. "How much did Crosby actually photograph? And how much has been published?" "Crosby photographed approximately 30 pages before you interrupted him by arriving in that corridor," Hartley reported. "The newspaper has been prevented from publishing the material through legal injunctions, but they still have the photographs. As for Thornton, we do not yet know what she may have accessed or copied." "Then we need to find her immediately," William said firmly. "And we need to understand exactly what we are dealing with." "Mitchell, you said Thornton paused by the trunk on the security footage. Was she alone, or could someone have been with her?" Edward thought back to what he had seen. "She appeared to be alone, Your Royal Highness. But she seemed to be looking at the trunk quite deliberately, as if she knew it was there and was assessing something about it. Perhaps confirming its location for someone else," Camilla suggested. "If she could not safely examine it herself at that moment, she may have been planning to return or to direct someone else to it." The theory made sense. If Thornton was working with others, she would have needed to provide specific information about where the trunk was located and when it might be accessible. Edward's discovery of it shortly afterward might have disrupted plans that were still being formed. "There is something else that troubles me," William said, addressing the room. "How did Crosby and possibly Thornton know what was in that trunk in the first place? It was not labeled with its contents. Tom certainly did not advertise what he was collecting. Someone had to tell them specifically what to look for and where it was likely to be stored." The implications hung heavy in the air. If William was right, then this was not just opportunistic theft, but a planned operation involving inside information. Someone close to the family, someone with detailed knowledge of Tom's project and the trunk's contents, had betrayed them. Camilla's face had gone pale. "You are suggesting someone within our inner circle is involved." "I am saying we cannot rule it out," William replied, his expression grim. "And until we know the full extent of this breach, we cannot trust anyone." His eyes moved to Edward, and for the first time, Edward saw genuine vulnerability in the prince's face. Anyone except those who have already proven themselves when it mattered most. In that moment, Edward understood the true weight of the responsibility that had fallen upon him. He was no longer just a guard conducting routine patrols. He was now part of a select group trusted to help protect the royal family, not just from physical threats, but from betrayal from within their own household. The trunk he had discovered in that corridor had opened far more than just a box of old letters. It had opened a window into the hidden vulnerabilities of a family that lived under constant scrutiny, where trust was precious and betrayal could come from the most unexpected sources. The breakthrough came 2 days later, though from an unexpected source. Rebecca Thornton did not return to her flat, and her phone remained switched off. However, her bank records revealed a pattern of unusual deposits over the past 3 months, each transferred from an account registered to a media consulting firm with known connections to several tabloid newspapers. More significantly, Thornton had made several calls to a phone number that investigators traced to Sarah Winters, a former lady-in-waiting to Queen Camilla, who had left royal service under ambiguous circumstances 18 months earlier. Winters had claimed health reasons for her departure, but rumors had circulated at the time about disagreements over unspecified household matters. Commander Hartley presented these findings to Prince William in a meeting that included Edward, several senior security officials, and the family's legal counsel. The conference room felt heavy with tension as the pieces of the puzzle came together. Winters would have known about Tom's archiving project, Hartley explained, pointing to a timeline displayed on a large screen. She was still working for Queen Camilla when Tom first discussed the idea with his mother. She would have had access to information about what kinds of materials were being collected and where they might be stored. William's expression was stony, and she used that knowledge to set up this entire operation. Crosby and Thornton were just the people doing the actual theft. Winters was the architect. "It appears so, Your Royal Highness," Hartley confirmed. "We believe she was motivated partly by financial gain. The tabloids would have paid handsomely for this kind of access, but also by personal resentment. Several of her former colleagues have suggested she felt slighted by how her departure was handled." Camilla, who had joined the meeting midway through, looked deeply pained. "Sarah worked for me for nearly 8 years. I trusted her with some of my most private concerns. To think she would do this." "She is currently being detained for questioning," the legal counsel interjected. "Based on the evidence gathered, we have a strong case for conspiracy to commit theft and breach of confidentiality agreements. Thornton was apprehended this morning attempting to board a flight to Spain." Edward listened to all of this with a mixture of satisfaction that the perpetrators were being caught and sadness that such betrayal had been necessary to uncover. He thought about his own moment of decision in that corridor, how easy it would have been to make a different choice, to become like Crosby or Thornton or Winters. The temptation of money and the rationalization that the royals could afford the betrayal might have swayed someone with less conviction. William stood and walked to the window, his familiar gesture of deep thought. The room fell silent, waiting for him to speak. When he finally turned back, his expression had changed from anger to something more resolute. "I have been thinking about this situation for the past several days," William began, "and I have come to a decision that some of you may find surprising. We are not going to pursue criminal charges against Crosby, Thornton, or Winters." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Even Edward could not hide his shock. Commander Hartley leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Your Royal Highness, with respect, these people committed serious crimes. They betrayed your trust and attempted to exploit private family correspondence for profit. Surely they must face consequences." "Oh, they will face consequences," William assured him. "But I want those consequences to serve a larger purpose than mere punishment. I have spent these past weeks watching how this incident has consumed our time, energy, and resources. I have watched my stepmother struggle with feelings of betrayal, from someone she trusted deeply. I have seen dedicated staff members like Mitchell subjected to investigation simply because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I've asked myself what we are actually trying to protect and why. He moved to stand behind his chair, gripping its back with both hands. Those letters in the trunk contain private family communications from a difficult period in our lives. Yes, they are sensitive. Yes, they could be misinterpreted. But they are also simply human conversations between family members trying to navigate complicated situations. We have spent so much energy trying to control the narrative around our lives that we sometimes forget that being human is not something that needs to be hidden or protected like a state secret. Camilla was watching him with an expression of surprise and perhaps concern. William, what exactly are you proposing? I am proposing that we take control of this situation in a way that no one will expect, William said, his voice growing stronger. Rather than fight to keep these letters secret, rather than spend years in court battles that will only draw more attention to them, I want to authorize the release of Tom's entire archive project to a reputable historical institution. Not just the letters that Crosby photographed, but all of it, properly contextualized, properly explained, made available to historians and the public in a controlled, dignified manner. The silence that followed was profound. Edward could barely believe what he was hearing. This was not damage control. This was a complete reversal of the usual royal approach to private matters. But William, Camilla began, her voice uncertain, some of those letters are quite personal. They discuss feelings and thoughts that I never intended for public consumption. I know, William said gently, moving to sit beside her, and I would never make this decision without your consent. But consider what we gain by doing this on our own terms. We control the narrative. We provide the context. We show that we have nothing to hide. Most importantly, we remove all the power from people like Winters and the tabloids that paid her. If the material is already publicly available with proper historical framing, there is no value in stolen photographs and out-of-context quotes. Edward watched as Camilla processed this proposal. Her face showed the internal struggle between a lifetime of maintaining privacy and the logic of William's strategy. Finally, she spoke. What would this look like practically? William turned to the legal counsel. We would work with the British Library or a similar respected institution. Tom's archive would be donated with appropriate historical documentation, explaining the context of each piece. Letters would be annotated, dates and circumstances explained. It would be presented as what it actually is, a family's personal history during a period of transition and change. And the people who tried to steal this material? Hartley asked. We offer them a deal, William said. They cooperate fully, return all photographs and copies, and sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements about operational details of the palace that they learned during their time here. In exchange, we do not pursue criminal charges. They lose any money they might have been paid. They are permanently barred from working for or selling information to any media outlets, but they avoid prison. The legal counsel nodded slowly. It is generous, perhaps too generous, but it would achieve several strategic objectives. It would demonstrate mercy while still protecting security interests. It would avoid the publicity of a trial, and it would completely deflate the value of their information. What about Mitchell? William asked suddenly, turning to look at Edward. This all started because he found that trunk and made the right choice about how to handle it. He has been an integral part of uncovering this operation. I think his perspective matters here. Edward felt every eye in the room turn toward him. He had not expected to be consulted on such a major decision. He took a moment to gather his thoughts before speaking. Your Royal Highness, I am just a guard. I do not presume to understand all the complexities of royal protocol or public relations. But I do know something about what people respect and what they do not. People respect honesty. They respect when someone admits to being human and imperfect. What they do not respect is the appearance of hiding things, even if those things are being hidden for legitimate privacy reasons. If you release this material on your own terms with proper context, I think people will see it as an act of courage and transparency, and they will respect you for it. William smiled for the first time in days. Thank you, Mitchell. That is exactly my instinct as well. He looked around the room. I know this is unconventional. I know some of you have concerns, but I believe this is the right path forward. We cannot spend the next 20 years afraid of what someone might leak or what story might be told about us. We need to live our lives, serve the public, and trust that honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, will serve us better than secrecy. Over the following weeks, William's plan was set in motion with careful precision. Tom Parker Bowles was brought into the discussions and, after initial hesitation, became one of the strongest advocates for the approach. He worked with historians to properly catalog and annotate every item in his collection, providing context that transformed the letters from potentially scandalous leaks into valuable historical documents. The British Library agreed to house the collection and make it available to researchers and eventually the public. The announcement was made through official channels, with William himself giving a short statement about the importance of preserving family history, while acknowledging that royal lives, like all lives, involve complicated human relationships and decisions. The public reaction astonished everyone. Rather than scandal, there was widespread praise for the transparency and the historical value of the archive. The tabloids that had paid Winters, Crosby, and Thornton for stolen information found their investment worthless. The very material they had hoped to sensationalize was now available, with proper context that made sensationalism impossible. As for Edward Mitchell, his temporary assignment became permanent. William personally requested that he be promoted to a senior position in royal security, specifically tasked with developing protocols that emphasized both protection and transparency. His commendation letter was amended to reflect his role in not just maintaining security, but in helping to reshape how the royal family approached the balance between privacy and public life. On a cold November morning, Edward stood in the same corridor where he had first discovered the trunk. It seemed like a lifetime ago, though only 2 months had passed. So much had changed, yet the corridor looked exactly the same. Polished floors, ancient portraits on the walls, the quiet dignity of a building that had witnessed centuries of history. Prince William found him there, perhaps by chance or perhaps by design. They stood together in silence for a moment, both thinking their own thoughts about what had transpired. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had simply walked past that trunk?" William asked quietly. Edward considered the question. "Sometimes, sir. But then I remember that we do not get to choose which moments will define us. We only get to choose how we respond when those moments arrive." William nodded. "That is wisdom worth remembering. You know, when I first encountered you that morning, I saw it as a problem to be managed, but it turned out to be an opportunity to do things differently, to be more honest, to trust in transparency, rather than always relying on control." "And has it worked out as you hoped?" Edward asked. "Better, actually," William admitted. "The response has been overwhelmingly positive. People appreciate being trusted with the truth, even when that truth is complicated, and within the family there is a sense of relief, as if we have put down a burden we did not realize we were carrying." They began walking together down the corridor, their footsteps echoing softly. "Mitchell, I want you to remember something. What you did that morning, keeping your integrity when no one was watching, choosing honesty over opportunity, that mattered more than you could have known. It set in motion a chain of events that changed how this family operates. That is not a small thing." "I was just doing my job, Your Royal Highness." "No," William corrected gently. "You were doing much more than that. You were being the kind of person that institutions like ours desperately need. Someone who understands that real security comes not from locks and walls and secrets, but from trust and integrity and the courage to do the right thing even when it is difficult." As they reached the end of the corridor and prepared to part ways, William extended his hand. Edward shook it, feeling the warmth and genuine respect in the gesture. "Thank you, Mitchell, for everything." "It has been my honor, sir." Edward watched Prince William walk away, disappearing around a corner toward whatever duties awaited him. Then he turned and resumed his rounds. Just another guard making sure all was well in the ancient halls of power. But he was no longer just a guard, and he knew it. He was someone who had been tested in an unexpected moment and had proven equal to that test. He was someone who had helped change, in a small but significant way, how the future King of England thought about transparency, trust, and what it meant to serve with integrity. The trunk in that corridor had contained letters and photographs, yes. But it had also contained a lesson about the choices we make when no one is watching, about the power of doing the right thing, and about how a single moment of integrity can reshape the course of events in ways we never expect. And that lesson, Edward thought as he continued his patrol, was worth more than any secret ever could be.